Hello and welcome to my kitchen. I'm going to be briefly talking about John Goldingay. John Edgar Goldingay was born 20 June 1942 in Birmingham, United Kingdom. He is a British Old Testament scholar and translator and an Anglican clergyman. He is the David Allen Hubbard, at least at the time of this writing he was, Professor Emeritus of Old Testament in the School of Theology of Fuller Theological Seminary. He's retired now. Actually living in Oxford now, where he and his wife live a fairy tale existence, as she would say, expecting to see C.S. Lewis or Tolkien or someone else from the history of that place pop around the corner at any time. It sounds nice. Goldingay obtained a Bachelor of Arts at the University of Oxford and a Doctor of Philosophy at the University of Nottingham. He also has a Doctor of Divinity, Lambeth degree. He was ordained a deacon in the Church of England in 1966 and a priest in 1967. Goldingay was a professor of Old Testament and Hebrew at St. John's College, Nottingham, and served as principal from 88 to 97. He went to Fuller Theological Seminary in 97, was an associate pastor at St. Barnabas Episcopal Church, Pasadena. He's married now to his second wife. His first wife, Anne, passed away in 2009 after 43 years of marriage together. She died of multiple sclerosis. In 2010, he married Kathleen Scott. He has two adult sons from his first marriage, stepdaughter from the second. And yes, he's living in Oxford now with his wife. As far as method goes, Goldingay takes particular pleasure in engaging in the narrative of the Old Testament. He believes that if people read the Bible for themselves, they will gain a more rounded picture of Yahweh. As young students would enter his class, he would advise them to read Genesis or the Psalms for themselves so that they might discover Yahweh is not a different God than that which is portrayed in the New Testament. Goldingay takes a decidedly exegetical approach, putting his training in Hebrew to use. He takes special notice of literary features in the text, mentioning chiasmus in the book of Isaiah as a means of understanding the narrative thrust of the work. If I were to pin a Old Testament biblical theology tag on Goldingay, it would be the Biblical Theology 3, which was the worldview story in the chart. He seems to like following the narrative of Scripture, allowing it to speak for itself. He does draw insight from the New Testament, but allows the Old Testament to stand on its own in telling its story. As far as emphases go, though thoroughly academic in his training and study, Goldingay is pastoral in his approach to the text. In his commentary on Isaiah, he addresses prayer by saying that our prayers which go unanswered for a long season put us in good company with the faithful of God, who waited for thousands of years to see God's promised deliverer come. He continues in a pastoral vein, saying that the church today is in good company as it waits for the fulfillment of God's promises. God's people do not see the details of his promises all worked out in a short, neat time, but they do see enough of his faithfulness to continue trusting his word that he will accomplish. One of the things that Goldingay is passionate about is the manner in which God relates to Israel and the nations. He posits the term universalist to describe God's work with the nations. That is not to say that all people are God's people by virtue of birth, but that all worshippers of Yahweh can gain universal acceptance as the people of God. He contrasts the nations from Ezra and Nehemiah, where marriage to foreigners represents Israel being joined to the gods of the nations. And he says that the nations who are acceptable to God are those who worship and love Yahweh. Coming from an Anglican tradition and serving as a priest and a pastor, Goldingay seeks to use his theological endeavors with direct application to his student or layperson. His love for ETS puts him in contact with the most influential scholars in evangelicalism. Goldingay has published major commentaries on several books of the Old Testament, as well as books on Old Testament theology and biblical interpretation. From 2010 to 2016, he issued the Old Testament for Everyone series through Westminster John Knox Press, a study guide for laypeople with original translation and study notes for each book of the Protestant Old Testament canon. In 2018, his complete translation of the Old Testament was released by InterVarsity Press under the title The First Testament. And also, notably, he has done works on Isaiah and the Psalms that are worth looking at. As far as problems or critique might go with him, it's been mentioned that Goldingay takes a more liberal view of Scripture and supposes that, for instance, Isaiah was written by two authors instead of just Isaiah. He says, or is quoted as saying, that not all the writings in the prophets correspond to the names that are given for the title of the books themselves, which to me is problematic. He also says that Daniel was actually written much more recently than was classically supposed. There's still so much wealth of insight in his work, but one should be aware of possible liberal tendencies in his dealing with the Scriptures. This is how he was trained, and it is the conventional scholarly approach for many in his path. Not every student has had the privilege of attending Moody, after all.